I never expected to spend my 58th birthday sleeping in an abandoned garage, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and 30 years of dust. Yet here I was, fumbling with an unfamiliar key in the dark, my daughter's words echoing in my mind, "You're just a useless old man, Dad. What would you even do with real money? Mom knew you just wasted on your junk cars." My name is Albert Reynolds, and let me tell you how I ended up homeless on my birthday, clutching a suitcase containing what remained of my 35-year marriage to the woman I loved more than life itself. My hand shook as I finally got the key into that rusted lock. The ancient door groaned like it hadn't been opened in decades. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside, and that's when I saw it. 3 shapes under custom-fitted covers, arranged with military precision in what should have been just another beat-up garage. But let me back up. You need to understand how I got here, standing in an industrial district at midnight, feeling like the biggest fool in California. The day had started with me sitting next to my daughter, Beverly, in our family attorney's office. She was in her $1,000 suit, me in the same black tie I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral 6 weeks earlier. Frederick Stone, our lawyer for 20 years, seemed uncomfortable as he prepared to read Dorothy's will. "Before I begin," Stone said, adjusting his glasses, "I want you both to know that everything here is legally binding and exactly as Mrs. Reynolds instructed." Looking back, I should have recognized that as a warning. The reading passed in a blur, but certain phrases hit me like punches to the gut. To my daughter, Beverly Reynolds, I leave our family residence in Pasadena, and my primary investment portfolio then almost as an afterthought. To my beloved husband, Albert Reynolds, I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway, the garage and its contents. A garage. After 35 years of marriage, my wife had left me a garage. Beverly's face went from fake grief to barely hidden satisfaction in about 2 seconds. I remember her hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I was too stunned to respond. Why would Dorothy do this? Where was I supposed to live? What was I supposed to do with my life? The answers came that evening when Beverly drove me back to what I still thought of as my home, the comfortable suburban house with the attached workshop where Dorothy and I had spent the last 15 years of our marriage. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I'd built most of the workshop myself, spending weekends turning it into a place where I could work on small projects and maintain our cars. I'd barely walked through the front door when Beverly set my suitcase down in the entryway. "I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay, Dad." I stared at her, not understanding. "What do you mean? The house is mine now. It's in the will." Her voice had that rehearsed quality she used in court. "I'm having some colleagues over tomorrow to discuss converting your workshop into a home office. I need to start making changes, but where am I supposed to go?" The question came out small and confused. I'd lived in this house for 15 years. Before that, Dorothy and I had rented a small apartment while I finished my engineering degree and started my career. This house represented everything we'd built together. Beverly shrugged, like she was discussing the weather. "You could stay with Uncle Fred for a while? Or there's always that garage Mom left you." She actually laughed at that, though why she left you that dump is beyond me. What are you going to do with it? Open a mechanic shop at your age? Something broke inside me then. Some foundation that had held up my world for 58 years just cracked in half. "Beverly, this is my home. Your mother and I built this life together. It's not your home anymore." She cut me off, her voice turning cold. "It's mine." Mom made that perfectly clear. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. I need time to find somewhere to go. "You can't expect me to leave tonight." That's when she said it. The words that would play in my head for months afterward. "You're just a useless old man, Dad. What would you even do with real money? Mom knew you just wasted on your junk cars." The cruelty was so unexpected, so different from the daughter I thought I'd raised that I couldn't even respond. I just took my suitcase, my keys, and the garage key Stone had given me and walked out. So here I was, standing in the doorway of a forgotten garage at midnight, my flashlight showing me something I couldn't process, because this wasn't some abandoned building filled with junk. The space in front of me contained 3 vehicles, each one covered with what looked like custom-fitted cloth covers. But it was the shape at the front that stopped my heart. Even under the cover, I could make out the unmistakable silhouette of what appeared to be a classic sports car. The low, aggressive stance and distinctive curves were impossible to mistake. What the hell was this? And why had Dorothy kept it secret from me for all these years? I stepped forward, driven by confusion and 35 years of loving anything with 4 wheels and an engine. I'd been a mechanical engineer before I retired, spent my whole career designing systems that made things work better, faster, stronger. Cars had always been my passion, even if I'd never been able to afford the classics I admired. My fingers trembled as I pulled the cover off the first car. The fabric slid away to reveal a 1964 Shelby Cobra 289 in pristine condition, painted in that perfect shade of racing blue with white stripes down the middle. The car gleamed under my flashlight like it had just rolled off the showroom floor, not like it had been sitting in some forgotten garage. "Dorothy," I whispered into the stillness. "What were you thinking?" My wife had never mentioned collecting cars. In 35 years of marriage, there had never been a hint of this passion, investment, or secret life. I didn't even know what to call it. I moved to the second vehicle, my heart pounding as I lifted its cover. A 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback emerged, painted in that classic Highland green that made every car guy's pulse quicken. This wasn't just any Fastback either. The badges and details told me this was a GT390, one of the high-performance models that had made the Mustang legend. The third cover hid a 1969 Dodge Charger RT painted in that deep orange they called Hemi Orange. But when I looked closer at the air scoop and hood pins, I realized this wasn't just any RT. This was a genuine Hemi car, one of the most sought-after muscle cars ever built. Each car sat on a small platform with a leather portfolio beside it containing what looked like documentation. Provenance papers, maintenance records, purchase agreements. I wasn't an expert in classic car values, but even I knew these weren't just nice old cars. These were the kind of machines that sold at auction for serious money. There had to be an explanation. That's when I noticed the envelope taped to the wall beside a light switch. It had my name written on it in Dorothy's careful handwriting. With hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I pulled it down and found the light switch. Modern LED fixtures flooded the garage with unexpected brightness, and I realized this wasn't just some abandoned building. The space had been professionally finished with climate control, custom flooring, security cameras, and specialized storage along the walls. This was a carefully designed automotive sanctuary. I sat down on a leather bench positioned against one wall, the envelope heavy in my hands. After what felt like forever, I broke the seal and pulled out several pages of Dorothy's personal stationery. "My dearest Albert, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've been building for your future. First, I need to apologize for the shock and confusion you must be feeling right now. The secrecy wasn't meant to hurt you, but to protect what I was creating for the rest of your life. 7 years ago, when I received my diagnosis, the doctors gave me 8 to 10 years at best. I knew our time together was limited, and I needed to ensure you would be taken care of after I was gone. But more than that, I needed to make sure Beverly wouldn't be able to control or manipulate your future. I had to stop reading. Dorothy's diagnosis of progressive heart disease had been devastating, but she'd always downplayed how serious it was. She'd made it sound like she had plenty of time, like the doctors were just being overly cautious. I had no idea she'd been planning for the end from the very beginning. I know you're wondering about the will, about why I would leave our home to Beverly instead of to you. Believe me, this decision caused me more sleepless nights than my illness ever did. But over the past few years, I've watched our daughter change. The ambitious girl we raised has become something harder, more entitled than I ever wanted her to be. The truth is, I was afraid of what would happen if I left everything to both of you jointly, or even if I split things equally. Beverly would have found ways to control the assets, to manage your portion for your benefit, as she would say. I've heard how she talks to you when she thinks I'm not listening, how she dismisses your opinions and treats you like you don't understand the modern world. A tear hit the paper, blurring the ink slightly. I hadn't realized Dorothy had noticed those interactions. Over the past few years, Beverly had become increasingly dismissive of my input on family decisions. When we discussed financial planning or major purchases, she would speak to Dorothy as if I wasn't in the room, or explain things to me like I was a child who couldn't understand basic concepts. I'd always made excuses for Beverly's behavior, telling myself she was just busy with her high-powered legal career. Corporate law was demanding, stressful work that required a certain aggressive mindset, but Dorothy had apparently seen something else entirely. So I created this inheritance with very deliberate intentions. Beverly has received what she will see as the valuable portion, the family home, the visible investments, the status symbols that matter to her. But what you're looking at now, my love, is the real wealth. I looked up from the letter at the 3 gleaming machines surrounding me. Real wealth. What could that possibly mean? I returned to Dorothy's letter, my hands steadier now, but my mind racing with questions. These 3 cars alone are worth approximately $1.44 million. The Cobra is worth about $650,000. The Mustang is worth $450,000. The documentation will confirm their authenticity, and you'll find contact information for Howard Barnes, my trusted advisor for these acquisitions. He's been maintaining them and can help you with whatever you decide to do. But Albert, the cars are just the beginning. In the safe behind the photograph of us at Yellowstone combination is our wedding date. You'll find documentation for several investment properties I've acquired over the past 7 years, all placed in a living trust that transferred to your name upon my death. You'll also find banking information for accounts that should provide you with comfortable income for the rest of your life. My hand shook so badly I had to set the letter down, a safe. I looked around the garage and spotted the framed photo on the wall near the workbench area, Dorothy and me at Old Faithful during our 30th anniversary trip, both of us laughing as the geyser erupted behind us. It seemed like a lifetime ago. The safe opened with a soft click when I entered our wedding date, 06/15. Inside, I found a thick portfolio and several USB drives, all neatly labeled. The top document was titled Estate of Dorothy Reynolds, Complete Asset Inventory for Albert Reynolds. I flipped it open and had to lean against the workbench for support. The numbers swam before my eyes. A duplex in Phoenix generating $2,400 monthly rental income. A small strip mall in Nevada with long-term commercial leases. 2 rental houses in Oregon. Stock portfolios in blue-chip companies, municipal bonds, even a small savings account that had been quietly accumulating compound interest for years. The total value at the bottom made me dizzy. $11 in $8 million. I stared at the number until my eyes watered. Dorothy, my practical wife who clipped grocery store coupons and insisted we shop at outlet stores, had somehow accumulated nearly $12 million in assets. With numb fingers, I returned to her letter. I know this is overwhelming, and I'm sorry for keeping all of this from you. At first, it was just anxiety about the future channeled into careful planning. But as the portfolio grew, I realized that revealing it too early might put everything at risk if Beverly discovered the extent of these holdings. You're probably wondering why I didn't simply protect you through more conventional means. The truth is, I wanted to give Beverly a chance to show her true character. Perhaps faced with her inheritance and responsibility for you, she would rise to become the woman we raised her to be. If she proves herself worthy, if she ensures your comfort and security, then perhaps you might choose to share some of this wealth with her. But if she reveals a different nature, then this legacy is your protection against that reality, your independence, your freedom. I've always believed that character reveals itself most clearly in moments of inheritance, both what we receive and what we believe we deserve. Beverly is receiving a test as much as an inheritance, and you, my love, are receiving the means to live the remainder of your life exactly as you choose, beholden to no one. I had to stop reading again as the implications hit me. Dorothy had known. She had anticipated exactly what Beverly would do when faced with the responsibility of caring for her aging father, had foreseen how she would react to gaining control of what appeared to be the family's primary assets. There's one more thing, Albert. I've prepared a small apartment above the garage office. It has everything you need for comfortable living: kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, even cable TV and internet. I hoped you'd never need it, but I wanted to ensure you'd have immediate shelter if Beverly's true nature emerged. The apartment key is in the desk drawer, along with instructions for all the systems I've had installed. The building's exterior appearance is intentionally deceptive. Inside, it's completely modernized and secure. I also want you to know that I've been documenting Beverly's behavior toward both of us over the past 2 years. The recordings and written records are in a separate safe deposit box. The key and location information are in the main safe. I pray you'll never need this evidence, but if you do, it's there. All my love now and always, Dorothy P.S. Drive the Cobra. Albert. I bought it because I remembered how your eyes lit up when we saw one at the car show in Monterey. You spent an hour talking to the owner about the engine specifications. Life is too short not to enjoy beautiful machines. I held the letter against my chest, tears flowing freely now. After 35 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my wife. Instead, I was only now discovering the true depth of her love, her intelligence, and her protective instincts. As I sat surrounded by millions of dollars worth of automotive history and real estate investments, the irony wasn't lost on me. Just hours ago, my daughter had thrown me out of what I thought was my home, calling me a useless old man while believing she'd received the valuable inheritance. Beverly had gotten the house probably worth $400,000 in the current Pasadena market. She'd gotten Dorothy's visible investment portfolio, which I now realized from reading the documents was worth about $150,000. In total, she'd inherited roughly $500,000 worth of assets. I'd gotten what appeared to be an abandoned garage in an industrial district. In reality, I'd inherited nearly $13 million in cars, real estate, and carefully managed investments. But more than that, I'd inherited something else. The knowledge that my wife had loved me enough to spend 7 years of her life creating an elaborate safety net to protect me from our own daughter. The question now was what to do with that knowledge. I climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment Dorothy had mentioned and found a surprisingly comfortable living space. Modern appliances, quality furniture, even family photos she'd somehow moved here without my knowledge. everything I needed to live independently with dignity for as long as necessary. That first night, I lay in the comfortable bed Dorothy had chosen for me, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the test she'd designed. Beverly had failed it spectacularly within hours of the will reading, but Dorothy had also given me discretion about what to do with that failure. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't noticed the night before. The apartment was better than comfortable. It was thoughtfully designed with everything a person could need. Dorothy had even stocked the kitchen with my favorite coffee and the cereal I ate every morning. As I made breakfast, I found a note she'd left on the refrigerator. Albert Howard Barnes will visit today at 10 a.m. He's been expecting this day for 2 years. Trust him as you trusted me. Even from beyond the grave, my wife was still taking care of details at exactly 10 a.m. I heard a truck pull up outside. Through the security cameras Dorothy had installed, I watched a man in his 60s climb out of a well-maintained Ford pickup. He moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd spent his life around valuable machinery. "Mr. Reynolds," he said when I opened the garage door. "I'm Howard Barnes. I've been looking forward to meeting you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances." Howard had the weathered hands of a man who'd worked on cars his entire life, but his eyes held the intelligence of someone who understood both the mechanical and financial sides of the classic car world. "Dorothy spoke about you often," he continued, extending his hand. "She was very proud of your engineering background. Said you'd appreciate these machines on a level most collectors never do." As we walked among the 3 cars, Howard began explaining Dorothy's strategy. "She started looking for the right vehicles about 6 years ago," he said, running his hand along the Cobra's fender. "Not just any classic cars, specific models that represented the best of American automotive engineering and had strong investment potential. But why cars?" I asked. Dorothy never showed any interest in automobiles beyond reliability and fuel economy. Howard smiled. "She told me that during her research phase. Said she wanted to leave you something that combined your professional interests with practical value, something you could understand, appreciate, and enjoy while it also served as a hedge against inflation." He opened the Cobra's hood, revealing the pristine 289 V8 engine. This particular car has documented racing history. It was campaigned by a semi-professional driver in SCCA events during 1965 and 1966. That provenance adds significantly to its value. We moved to the Mustang. The fastback was harder to find in this condition. Original Highland green paint matching numbers 390 engine, 4-speed transmission. Dorothy was very specific about authenticity, and the Charger, that one's special, real Hemi car with the original 426 engine. Only about 400 of these were built in 1969. The market for genuine Hemi cars has been incredibly strong. Howard walked over to a filing cabinet I hadn't noticed the night before. "All the documentation is here. Purchase records, authentication certificates, maintenance logs. Your wife was meticulous about keeping everything properly documented." "What am I supposed to do with all this?" I asked. "Whatever you want," Howard replied. "You could sell them individually or as a collection. You could keep them as investments. These models have been appreciating steadily for the past decade. You could even drive them, though that would affect their collector value somewhat." He paused, studying my expression. "Or you could do what Dorothy hoped you'd do, which is enjoy them. She bought that Cobra specifically because she remembered your reaction when we saw one at a car show 3 years ago. You spent an hour talking to the owner about the engineering details. She said it was the most animated she'd seen you since you retired. I remembered that day. We'd gone to the Monterey car auction just to look around, and I'd been fascinated by the simplicity and effectiveness of the Cobra's design. The owner had been happy to discuss the technical aspects, the lightweight construction, the suspension geometry, the way Carroll Shelby had taken a British roadster and transformed it with American power. Dorothy bought this because of one conversation at a car show. She bought it because she loved you, Howard corrected gently. The conversation just confirmed what she already suspected, that you'd appreciate these machines on multiple levels. We spent the next hour going over the practical aspects. Howard had been maintaining all 3 cars through monthly visits. Oil changes, battery maintenance, tire pressure, occasional exercise to keep the engines healthy. Dorothy had paid him 2 years in advance. There's no rush to make any decisions. He assured me as we concluded our meeting, these cars have waited this long, they can wait longer. After Howard left, I sat in the apartment going through the financial documents more carefully. Dorothy's planning was extraordinary in its thoroughness. The rental properties all had professional management companies handling day-to-day operations. The investment accounts were with reputable firms that provided quarterly statements. Even the tax implications had been carefully structured through the living trust arrangement. I was financially independent. More than independent, I was wealthy by any reasonable standard. and Dorothy had done it all while maintaining the modest lifestyle we'd always shared. But independence came with choices, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the decisions ahead. My phone rang around noon. Beverly's number appeared on the screen. "Dad, where are you?" I tried calling the house number and realized it was disconnected. "I'm staying at the garage," I said simply. "The garage?" "Dad, you can't live in some industrial building. That's ridiculous. It's more comfortable than you might think. Look, I've been thinking about yesterday. Maybe I was a bit hasty. Why don't you come back to the house? We can work something out a bit hasty." That was her description of throwing her father out on the street hours after learning he'd inherited almost nothing. "I'm fine where I am, Beverly. But it's just a garage. What are you going to do there?" "I'm still figuring that out." "Dad, be reasonable. I have extra bedrooms. You don't need to live in some rundown building just to prove a point." What point was I proving? That I had dignity, that I deserved basic respect from my own daughter, that 58 years of life experience might have given me some competence in managing my own affairs. "I'll think about it," I said, which was true. I would think about it. I'd think about what kind of relationship was possible with a daughter who could discard me so casually when she believed I had nothing to offer. After hanging up with Beverly, I sat in the quiet apartment thinking about her sudden change in tone. Yesterday, I was a useless old man who couldn't be trusted with real money. Today, I was someone she wanted to help by offering me a spare bedroom. The difference was that yesterday she believed I had nothing. Today, she was starting to wonder if that was true. Over the next few days, I began to understand the scope of Dorothy's planning. She'd left detailed instructions for everything: contact information for property managers, investment advisors, even a recommended attorney who specialized in estate law. I called Carol Jenkins, the lawyer Dorothy had worked with on the trust arrangements. She agreed to meet me at the garage the following morning. Carol was a sharp woman in her 50s who arrived precisely on time and got straight to business. "Mrs. Reynolds was one of my most thorough clients," she said, as we reviewed the documents. "Everything is properly structured and completely legal. The living trust transferred all assets to you automatically upon her death, and Beverly can't contest any of this. She could try, but it would be expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful. Your wife worked with excellent advisors and followed all proper procedures. More importantly, she documented her reasoning extensively." Carol handed me another folder I hadn't seen before. These are her notes explaining each decision. She was very concerned about protecting these assets from potential family disputes. I read through Dorothy's careful documentation. She'd anticipated questions about her mental competency, Beverly's potential claims of undue influence, even the possibility that someone might argue the inheritance was unfairly structured. "Your wife was very intelligent," Carol continued. "She understood that large inheritances can create family conflict. So she designed this to minimize legal vulnerabilities while giving you maximum protection." "What about the other assets Dorothy mentioned, the recordings and documentation?" Carol's expression grew more serious. "Those are in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. The key and access information are in your main safe, Mrs. Reynolds said to use those only if absolutely necessary." After Carol left, I drove to the bank and accessed the safe deposit box. What I found made me sit down hard in the small viewing room they provided. Audio recordings of phone conversations between Beverly and her friends discussing how she planned to manage my finances for my own good after Dorothy died. Email printouts where she complained about having to deal with Dad's stubborn ideas about money. Even handwritten notes Dorothy had made documenting incidents where Beverly had dismissed or insulted me during family gatherings. The most damaging recording was from just 2 months before Dorothy died. Beverly talking to someone about how she planned to sell the family house immediately after the funeral and use the proceeds to buy herself a condo closer to her office. "Dad will be fine in some senior community," her voice said clearly through the small speaker. "He doesn't need a big house anymore, and honestly, the money would be better invested in my career. I'm about to make partner and image matters in corporate law." Dorothy had been systematically documenting evidence of Beverly's character for over 2 years. I locked everything back in the safe deposit box and returned to the garage, my mind churning. Dorothy hadn't just protected me financially, she'd prepared me for a legal battle if Beverly decided to fight for control of the assets. That evening, Beverly called again. "Dad, I'm concerned about you living in that industrial area. It's not safe for someone your age. I'm managing fine, Beverly. But what if there's an emergency? What if you need help? You should at least give me your address so I know where you are." I could hear the frustration in her voice. She wanted to know exactly where I was and what I was doing. Control had always been important to Beverly, even as a child. As an adult, it had become an obsession. "I'll think about it," I repeated. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You're being stubborn for no reason. I'm trying to help you. Like you helped me when you threw me out of my home." Silence on the line. I was upset about Mom's death, she said finally. People say things they don't mean when they're grieving, do they? Or do they say things they usually keep hidden? What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Beverly. I'm just trying to understand why your grief expressed itself as cruelty toward me. Another silence. Fine. Stay in your garage. But don't expect me to keep checking on you, if you're going to be unreasonable. She hung up before I could respond. I spent that evening reading more of Dorothy's notes and planning documents. She'd thought of everything: tax implications, estate planning, even contingency plans if the real estate market shifted dramatically. But she'd also included something else, a detailed analysis of Beverly's financial situation. Her salary at the law firm, her student loan debt, her credit card balances, even her spending patterns on luxury purchases. Beverly was living beyond her means. Despite making good money as a corporate attorney, she'd accumulated significant debt trying to maintain an image that impressed her colleagues and clients. The house she'd inherited would help, but only if she could avoid the temptation to borrow against its equity for more lifestyle spending. Dorothy had known this too. She'd been watching our daughter's financial decisions and growing increasingly concerned about her judgment. The next morning, I decided to take Howard's advice and drive the Cobra. I'd been licensed to drive since I was 16, but I'd never experienced anything like the surge of power when I pressed the accelerator. The 289 V8 responded instantly, pushing me back into the leather seat as the car accelerated with surprising smoothness. Dorothy had been right. This was more than transportation. It was engineering artistry. As I drove through the industrial district toward a quiet stretch of highway, I thought about the strange turn my life had taken. 3 days ago, I'd believed myself to be essentially homeless and financially dependent on my daughter's grudging charity. Now I was driving a $650,000 classic car that I owned outright, returning to an apartment above a garage that contained nearly $13 million in assets. But the real revelation wasn't about money. It was about Dorothy's extraordinary love and foresight, and about finally seeing Beverly's true character without the filters of parental hope and wishful thinking. The question was what to do with that knowledge. Over the next week, I established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Morning coffee in the apartment while reviewing investment statements, a walk around the industrial district to get familiar with the neighborhood. Afternoons spent learning about the cars from Howard during his maintenance visits, but I was also doing something else: planning. Dorothy had given me more than financial security. She'd given me information, documentation, and time to observe Beverly's true character without the pressure of immediate financial dependence. I started a journal, documenting each interaction with my daughter, her phone calls, her demands for information, her attempts to guilt me into accepting her help. I recorded our conversations following the legal guidelines Carol Jenkins had explained. Beverly's calls became more frequent and more aggressive. "Dad, I need your address. What if there's an emergency?" "I'm fine, Beverly. I have neighbors who check on me." "What neighbors? It's an industrial district. There are other businesses here, good people," which was true. I'd met the owner of the auto repair shop next door, a man named Tommy Rodriguez who'd worked on cars for 30 years. When I'd introduced myself as the new owner of the garage building, he'd offered to keep an eye on the place. "Dad, this is getting ridiculous. I'm going to drive out there and find you myself." "That's your choice, Beverly." "Fine, I will." 2 days later, I watched on the security cameras as Beverly's BMW slowly cruised the industrial district. She stopped in front of several buildings, clearly frustrated by the uniform appearance of the warehouses and light manufacturing facilities. The exterior of my building looked exactly like all the others: weathered concrete, small windows, a standard roll-up door. Dorothy's camouflage was perfect. Beverly spent over an hour driving around before giving up. That evening, she called with a different approach. "Dad, I'm worried about you. You sound different lately." "Different how?" "I don't know, more distant. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating properly?" This was new. Concern for my welfare rather than demands for control. "I'm eating fine. I've actually been cooking more than I have in years. And you're sleeping okay? In whatever kind of place you're staying?" "Very well, thank you, Dad. I feel terrible about how we left things after the funeral. I was emotional, not thinking clearly." "Why don't you come back to the house? We can figure out a living arrangement that works for both of us." I could hear the calculation in her voice. She was trying a different strategy, contrition instead of control. "I appreciate that, Beverly. But I'm comfortable where I am." "But for how long?" "You can't live in some temporary situation indefinitely." "Actually, I can. I've found the arrangement quite suitable for my needs." Another pause. "Dad, are you hiding something from me?" There it was. The real question she'd been building toward. What would I be hiding? I don't know. "But your whole attitude has changed since the funeral. It's like you know something I don't. I know that your mother loved me very much. I know that she planned carefully for my future. and I know that her judgment about people was usually excellent. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm learning to trust her wisdom even when I don't initially understand her decisions. Beverly's voice turned sharp. Dad, if there's something about Mom's estate that wasn't properly disclosed, you need to tell me. I have legal rights as her daughter. You received everything your mother intended you to have. How can you be sure? What if there were assets she kept secret? What if there are accounts or properties that should have been part of the estate distribution? I thought about the $8 million in documented assets sitting in the safe downstairs, and the 3 classic cars worth another $1 in. Your mother was very thorough in her planning, Beverly. I'm confident she followed all proper procedures. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if there are additional assets that weren't listed in the will. Why don't you ask Frederick Stone? He handled all the legal work. I did ask him. He said everything was properly disclosed and distributed according to your mother's instructions. Then you have your answer. Dad, I think you need to understand something. If there are hidden assets, if Mom was concealing property or investments that could affect the validity of the entire will, I could petition the court to reopen the estate, and there it was. The threat I'd been expecting. That's certainly your right, Beverly. Though I imagine it would be expensive and time-consuming. I can afford good attorneys. I'm sure you can. After she hung up, I sat in the apartment thinking about the conversation. Beverly was clearly suspicious, but she didn't know what she was looking for or where to find it. She was fishing, hoping I'd reveal something that would give her leverage, but she'd also revealed something important about herself. When persuasion failed, she immediately moved to legal threats. Control was so important to her that she was willing to challenge her mother's will rather than accept that Dorothy might have made decisions Beverly didn't understand or approve of. I called Carol Jenkins the next morning. She's threatening to contest the will. I told her, on what grounds? Hidden assets? She thinks Dorothy concealed property or investments that should have been part of the estate distribution. Carol was quiet for a moment. That could be problematic if she can find evidence of undisclosed assets. But everything was properly documented and transferred through the trust, right? Yes, but trusts can be challenged if someone can prove they were created to defraud heirs of their legitimate inheritance. My stomach tightened. Could Beverly actually succeed with that argument? Probably not, but she could make things expensive and complicated. The best defense would be to demonstrate that your wife had legitimate reasons for her estate planning decisions. What kind of reasons? Evidence that Beverly wasn't suitable to manage significant assets responsibly, documentation of her financial irresponsibility or poor judgment, proof that your wife was protecting the assets from mismanagement rather than trying to cheat anyone. I thought about the safe deposit box full of recordings and documentation. I think we may have that kind of evidence. Good. But Albert, there's something else you should consider. What's that? Your daughter is a corporate attorney. She has resources and connections. If she's determined to fight this, she'll likely hire investigators to look into your current situation. You should be prepared for that possibility. Carol's warning about investigators stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks earlier. I was going to fight back, but not with anger or emotion. I was going to use the same methodical approach that had made me successful as an engineer. Careful, planning, attention to detail, and strategic thinking. The next morning, I called a private investigator that Carol had recommended. Roy Martinez was a former police detective who specialized in family law cases and asset protection. Mr. Reynolds, he said when we met at a coffee shop near the garage, Carol told me you might need some help with a family situation. Roy was in his 50s, with the careful eyes of someone who'd spent years observing people in situations. He listened without interruption as I explained Beverly's threats and her likely next moves. She's going to hire someone to investigate your living situation, he confirmed. Corporate attorneys have access to good investigators, and they'll want to know exactly what assets you control. What can they find out? Depends on how thorough they are. Property records are public, so they'll eventually identify all the real estate holdings in the trust. Bank records are harder to access, but not impossible if they can establish probable cause for a legal challenge. Roy leaned forward. But here's the thing, investigation works both ways. If your daughter is planning to challenge your wife's estate plan, we need to be ready with evidence about why those plans were necessary. You mean the recordings Dorothy made? That's part of it, but we should also document her current behavior. If she's harassing you, making threats, or acting in ways that prove your wife's concerns were justified, that becomes evidence supporting the estate plan. Over the next hour, Roy outlined a strategy that was both defensive and proactive. We would document all interactions with Beverly. We would prepare detailed financial records showing the responsible management of the inherited assets. and we would build a case demonstrating that Dorothy's estate planning had been based on legitimate concerns about Beverly's character and judgment. "There's one more thing," Roy said as our meeting concluded. "You should consider what you ultimately want to achieve. Are you trying to protect the assets from your daughter permanently? Or are you hoping she might change and earn the right to share in the inheritance?" It was a good question. Dorothy's letter had suggested that Beverly might prove herself worthy of sharing the wealth. But everything that had happened since the funeral suggested the opposite. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "I suppose I'm hoping for the best while preparing for the worst. Smart approach. Let's see what develops." The development came sooner than expected. 3 days later, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across from the garage building. The driver appeared to be watching the entrance and taking photographs. I called Roy immediately. "Can you describe the car and the person?" "Late model sedan, probably a rental. The driver looks like a professional suit, notepad, camera with a long lens. Sounds like your daughter hired someone. Let me make some calls." 2 hours later, Roy called back. The investigator is named Patricia Wong, works for a firm that specializes in asset searches and family law cases. "Good reputation, thorough work. What will she be looking for? Evidence of undisclosed assets. Signs that you're living better than someone with your apparent inheritance should be able to afford. Anything that suggests there's more to your financial situation than what was revealed in the will. How long before she figures out what's really going on? Hard to say. The trust documents are complex and the real estate holdings are scattered across multiple states. But if she's good at her job, she'll eventually piece it together." That evening, Beverly called with a different tone in her voice, more confident, like someone who just gained an advantage. "Dad, I've been doing some research into Mom's financial activities before she died. Oh, there are some irregularities. Property purchases that don't appear in her regular financial records. Large cash transfers that aren't easily explained." So Patricia Wong had already found some pieces of the puzzle. "Your mother was very careful with financial planning, Beverly. Maybe too careful. Some of these transactions look like they were deliberately concealed, or they were legally structured through proper estate planning vehicles. Dad, I think we need to have a serious conversation. Face to face. I'm listening. Not over the phone. I want to meet with you tomorrow. Bring whatever financial documents you have related to Mom's estate. We need to get everything out in the open. And if I prefer to handle my financial affairs privately, then I'll have to assume you're hiding something that affects my inheritance rights, and I'll take appropriate legal action." After she hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment considering my options. I could continue the game of concealment, letting Beverly's investigators slowly uncover pieces of the truth while I tried to stay ahead of her discoveries. Or I could take control of the narrative and reveal everything on my own terms. I called Roy back. "She wants a meeting. She's found some of the property transactions and she's suspicious." "What do you want to do?" "I think it's time to stop hiding, but I want to do it strategically." "What do you mean?" "I want her to understand not just what Dorothy left me, but why she left it that way. I want Beverly to confront the evidence of her own behavior and see exactly why her mother felt the need to protect these assets from her." Roy was quiet for a moment. "That's a high-risk strategy. Once she knows the full extent of what you inherited, she'll throw everything she has into challenging it. Maybe. Or maybe she'll finally understand that her mother knew exactly what she was doing. And if she doesn't understand, if she just gets angrier and more determined to fight, then we'll be ready for her. We'll have all of Dorothy's evidence, all the documentation of Beverly's behavior since the funeral, and the moral high ground of someone who was protecting his assets rather than hiding them dishonestly. Okay, let's plan this carefully. If you're going to reveal everything, we want to do it in a way that strengthens your position rather than weakening it. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to tell Beverly the truth, all of it. But first, I was going to make sure I had every advantage possible when that conversation took place. I spent the morning preparing for what might be the most important conversation of my life. Roy arrived at the garage at 9 a.m. with equipment I hadn't expected, professional recording devices, small cameras, and what looked like legal documents. "If we're going to do this," he said, setting up his equipment in the apartment, "we're going to do it right. Everything needs to be documented. Is that legal? California is a two-party consent state for recordings, so we'll need to inform your daughter that the conversation is being recorded. Most people don't object when they think they have the upper hand." Roy helped me arrange the apartment so that our conversation would be clearly visible and audible from multiple angles. He also provided me with a detailed script of key points to cover. "Remember," he said, "this isn't just about revealing the assets. It's about demonstrating that your wife had legitimate reasons for her decisions. We want Beverly's reaction to show that those reasons were justified." At noon, I called Beverly. "I've decided you're right," I told her. "We should have a face-to-face conversation about your mother's estate." "Good. Where do you want to meet here?" "At the garage." A pause. "You want me to come to some industrial building?" "It's where I'm living now, Beverly. If you want to have this conversation, this is where it needs to happen." "Fine. Give me the address." 1420 Industrial Parkway. It's about 20 minutes from your office. I'll be there at 2 p.m. And Dad, I'm bringing my attorney. That's fine. I'll have representation as well. After hanging up, Roy and I made final preparations. Carol Jenkins arrived at 1:30, along with Howard Barnes, who had brought detailed documentation about the car collection. You're sure about this approach? Carol asked one final time. I'm tired of hiding, I replied. Dorothy left me these assets for a reason. If Beverly wants to challenge that, she should at least understand what she's challenging and why. At exactly 2 p.m., Beverly arrived with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Richard Hayes. Behind them came a woman with a camera and notepad, presumably the investigator. This is Patricia Wong, Beverly said. She's been helping me research some irregularities in Mom's estate. Please come in, I said, leading them through the garage to the apartment stairs. Beverly's eyes widened when she saw the 3 covered cars. What are those? Part of what your mother left me. We'll discuss everything upstairs. The apartment surprised them even more. Beverly looked around at the comfortable furnishings, the modern appliances, the obvious signs of long-term planning. You're actually living here. Your mother prepared this space for me several years ago. We settled around the dining table with Roy's cameras recording everything. I started the formal recording equipment. I'm going to record our conversation for legal purposes, I announced. Does anyone object? Richard Hayes looked uncomfortable but shook his head. Beverly seemed too focused on her surroundings to care about recording. Before we begin, I continued, I want to establish some ground rules. You came here because you believe there are irregularities in your mother's estate. I'm going to show you exactly what she left me and explain why she made those decisions. In return, I want your honest reaction to what you learn. Fine, Beverly said. But I want to understand why you've been hiding all this. I pulled out the portfolio from Dorothy's safe and set it on the table. I haven't been hiding anything. I've been learning about assets I didn't know existed until after the funeral. Beverly opened the portfolio and began reading. Her expression changed from curiosity to confusion to something approaching shock. These property values, she said slowly. This can't be right. Your mother accumulated those assets over 7 years, Carol explained, all properly documented and legally transferred through the living trust. But this says, Beverly flipped through pages rapidly, $11.8 million in real estate and investments, plus the cars downstairs, Howard added quietly. Beverly stared at him. What cars? Would you like to see them? I asked. We trooped downstairs, where I began removing the covers from the 3 vehicles. Beverly's attorney whistled softly when the Cobra was revealed. Jesus, Beverly breathed when all 3 cars sat gleaming under the LED lights. These are worth about $1.4 million total, Howard said, authenticated, documented, and properly insured. Beverly sank onto the leather bench, staring at the cars. You've had access to over $13 million this entire time. Since the night you threw me out of my home, yes, but you let me think you had nothing. You let me believe Mom had left you practically destitute. You made that assumption without asking questions. I never told you I had nothing. Patricia Wong was taking photographs and notes frantically. Richard Hayes was reading through the portfolio with growing amazement. This changes everything, he said to Beverly. If these assets are legitimate, then your mother's estate was worth over $14 million, not the $600,000 we thought. Beverly looked up at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before, minus certainty mixed with growing anger. Why? She demanded. Why would Mom do this? Why would she leave you everything and give me scraps? She didn't leave me everything, I replied calmly. She left you exactly what she thought you could handle responsibly. What's that supposed to mean? I nodded to Roy, who began playing the first audio recording. Beverly's own voice filled the room, discussing plans to sell the family home and use the money for her career advancement. Dad will be fine in some senior community. He doesn't need a big house anymore, and honestly, the money would be better invested in my career. Beverly's face went white as her own words played back. You recorded my private conversations? Your mother did, I corrected. For over 2 years, she was documenting evidence of your attitude toward family responsibilities. Roy played another recording, then another. Email printouts followed, showing Beverly's communications with friends about her plans for managing my finances for my own good. With each piece of evidence, Beverly's expression shifted from shock to embarrassment to something approaching rage. This is entrapment, she finally said. Mom set me up. Your mother gave you a test, I replied. You failed it within hours of her funeral. Beverly stood abruptly, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. You can't use illegally obtained recordings in any legal proceeding. Actually, Carol said calmly, these recordings were made by your mother in her own home, documenting conversations that affected her estate planning decisions. They're perfectly legal and admissible. This is manipulation, Richard Hayes said, though his voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Reynolds deliberately concealed assets to influence her daughter's behavior. Mrs. Reynolds protected assets from someone she had documented reasons to believe would mismanage them. Carol replied, "There's a significant legal difference." Beverly began pacing the small apartment. "So what? Mom recorded some private conversations where I vented to friends. That doesn't prove anything about my ability to manage money responsibly." I pulled out another folder. "These are your credit reports and financial records that your mother obtained with your permission when you asked her to co-sign your student loan refinancing 2 years ago." Beverly's expression changed as she recognized the documents. "You went through my private financial information. Your mother was concerned about patterns she observed in your spending and debt management. She wanted to understand whether her concerns were justified." The financial records painted a clear picture. Despite earning a substantial salary as a corporate attorney, Beverly had accumulated significant credit card debt. Multiple luxury purchases charged to cards that were already near their limits, a lease on a BMW that consumed nearly 20% of her gross income, regular cash advances to cover lifestyle expenses that exceeded her earnings. "These numbers don't lie," Howard said quietly. "Your mother was worried that you'd view a large inheritance as an opportunity to increase your spending rather than build long-term security." "That's not fair," Beverly protested. "Lots of young professionals have debt. It's an investment in career advancement." "A $3,000 handbag is an investment in career advancement?" I asked, pointing to one of the credit card statements. "Image matters in corporate law. Clients notice these things, and is that why you plan to sell our family home immediately after the funeral? For image management." Beverly's attorney was reading through the financial documents with obvious concern. "Beverly, these debt-to-income ratios are problematic. If you were my client applying for a mortgage, I'd have serious concerns about your financial stability. Whose side are you on?" Beverly snapped. "I'm on the side of legal reality," Hayes replied. "Your mother appears to have had legitimate concerns about your financial judgment." Patricia Wong had been quiet throughout the confrontation, but now she spoke up. "Ms. Reynolds, I need to ask, did you know about your spending patterns when you hired me to investigate potential hidden assets? What difference does that make? Because if your mother was aware of financial irresponsibility on your part, her estate planning decisions take on a different character. This isn't about hiding assets from a deserving heir. It's about protecting assets from someone who might not manage them wisely." Beverly sat back down heavily. "So I'm being punished for living my life the way I choose?" "No," I said gently. "You're experiencing the natural consequences of choices you made. Your mother didn't punish you, she protected assets she'd worked her entire life to accumulate. But $13 million, Dad. $13 million. Do you have any idea what I could do with that kind of money? Based on your current financial patterns, you'd probably spend it within 5 years and end up deeper in debt than you are now." Beverly stared at me as if I'd slapped her. "That's not true, isn't it? You make excellent money as an attorney, but you live beyond your means. You prioritize appearance over substance. You assume that more money will solve problems caused by poor financial judgment." Roy played another recording, Beverly talking to a friend about her plans to borrow against the house equity to consolidate her credit card debt, and maybe take a nice vacation to recover from Mom's death. "I never said that," Beverly protested weakly, even as her own voice continued speaking from the recording. "Your mother heard you," I said. "She heard you planning to use her death as an opportunity to solve financial problems you'd created through poor decisions." "That's not how I meant it." "How did you mean it?" Beverly looked around the room at her attorney, at the investigator she'd hired, at the evidence of her mother's careful planning. I meant that I deserved to inherit something meaningful after losing my mother." "You did inherit something meaningful. A beautiful home and a substantial investment portfolio, worth about $550,000 total, which is nothing compared to what you got. Which is exactly what your mother believed you could handle responsibly." Richard Hayes closed the portfolio and leaned back in his chair. "Beverly, I have to advise you that challenging this estate plan would be extremely difficult and expensive. Your mother documented extensive evidence supporting her decisions, so I just accept that Mom thought I was incompetent. You accept that your mother loved you enough to leave you assets she believed would benefit rather than burden you," Carol said. "And you consider whether you want to prove her concerns were justified by fighting this in court." Beverly was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "What happens now? That depends on you," I replied. "Your mother's letter suggested that if you demonstrated different character, if you showed that her concerns were unfounded, I might choose to share some of these assets with you. And if I don't, if I can't prove I'm worthy of your approval, then you continue living your life with the inheritance your mother specifically intended for you. A beautiful home, financial security, and the opportunity to learn better financial judgment without the risk of losing everything." Beverly's attorney began packing up his documents. "I think we've learned everything we need to know today. Are you still planning to challenge the will, Roy asked. Hayes looked at Beverly, who was staring at the floor. We'll need to discuss that privately, but based on what I've seen today, such a challenge would be inadvisable. As they prepared to leave, Beverly stopped at the door. Dad. Yes. Did Mom really think I was that bad? That irresponsible? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Under the anger and entitlement, there was genuine hurt. The pain of realizing that her mother had judged her character and found it lacking. Your mother loved you very much, I said finally, but she also saw patterns in your behavior that worried her. She hoped that time and experience might help you develop better judgment. And what do you think? I think that's up to you to prove one way or the other. After Beverly and her team left, the garage felt eerily quiet. Roy, Carol, and Howard helped me clean up the recording equipment and reorganize the documents. That went better than I expected, Carol said. Her attorney clearly understands the strength of your position. She looked genuinely shocked, Howard added. I don't think she realized how much evidence your wife had accumulated. Roy was more cautious. Don't assume this is over. People react differently to this kind of revelation. She might come back fighting harder, or she might withdraw and try a different approach. What would you do in her position? I asked. If I were smart, I'd accept the inheritance I received and work on proving I deserved more. If I were proud and angry, I'd probably make some very expensive legal mistakes. That evening, Beverly called. Her voice was different, smaller, less confident than I'd heard in years. Dad, I've been thinking about today. I imagine you have. I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. All right? Did you know? Before today, did you know about Mom's recordings and the financial investigation? I considered my answer carefully. I discovered the recordings after you threw me out of the house. I didn't know about them while your mother was alive, but you listened to them. You heard what I said about you. I did. How long have you known that I was planning to sell the house? Since I found the recordings 2 weeks ago. A long silence. So when I called offering to let you come back, you knew I was only doing it because I suspected you had assets I didn't know about. The timing was suspicious. Yes. Another pause. God, Dad. How does it feel to know your own daughter was planning to put you in a nursing home so she could use your inheritance to pay for her lifestyle? The pain in her voice was genuine. For the first time since Dorothy's funeral, Beverly sounded like the girl I'd raised rather than the calculating attorney she'd become. It feels like your mother was right to be concerned, I said gently. I never meant for it to sound so callous. How did you mean for it to sound? I don't know. I guess I thought you'd be happier in a place with people your own age, structured activities, professional care, without asking what I wanted. I thought I knew what was best for you, and the money was selling the house really about what was best for me. Beverly was quiet for so long I wondered if she'd hung up. No, she finally said, I needed the money. I've made some really poor financial decisions, and I thought Mom's death would solve my problems. What kind of poor decisions? Credit cards, the car lease. I bought a timeshare in Cabo that I can't afford. I've been borrowing against my 401 kilocash to cover monthly expenses. I thought about the financial documents Dorothy had shown me, the evidence of spending far beyond Beverly's means, even with her substantial salary. How bad is it, Beverly, bad? If I don't find a way to pay down my debt, I might lose everything. The partnership track at my firm requires a certain image, and if they find out about my financial problems, it could destroy my career. So you saw your mother's death as a solution to problems you'd created. That sounds horrible when you say it like that. It sounds honest. I loved Mom. I miss her every day. But yes, I thought her inheritance would give me breathing room to get my finances under control. And when you believed I'd inherited almost nothing, your first instinct was to make me your dependent rather than help me become independent. I thought you needed protection. Management, you thought I was incompetent. Maybe I did. Maybe I've been thinking of you as incompetent for a long time without realizing it. This was the most honest conversation Beverly and I had shared in years. Her admission of viewing me as incompetent stung, but it also explained patterns I'd noticed but never understood. Beverly, can I ask you something? Sure. When did you stop respecting my judgment? She was quiet again. I don't know exactly. Gradually, I think when I started making more money than you ever did. When I learned about financial instruments you'd never heard of. When I saw how other successful people manage their parents' affairs. So success in your career made you assume I was unsuccessful in life? I guess it did. You and Mom lived so modestly. You drove old cars, shopped at discount stores, took vacations to state parks instead of resorts. I thought you didn't understand how money could work for you. But we were building wealth the entire time, just not in ways you recognized. Obviously, $13 million doesn't appear by accident. Your mother was very smart about money, much smarter than I gave her credit for. Smarter than I gave her credit for too, apparently. We sat in silence for a moment, the phone line carrying only our breathing. Dad, what happens now? Between us, I don't know, Beverly. That depends on what you do with what you've learned. What do you mean? Your mother designed this inheritance as a test of character. You failed the initial test, but that doesn't mean it's over. She left me discretion about sharing these assets if you demonstrated different qualities. What kind of qualities? Responsibility, respect for others, financial wisdom, concern for family beyond what they can provide for you. And if I can't demonstrate those qualities, then you live with the inheritance your mother specifically intended for you, and you learn to be grateful for it instead of resentful about what you didn't receive. $550,000 is a lot of money. It's enough to pay off your debts and start fresh with better financial habits. And if I prove myself worthy of more, then we'll see what develops. But Beverly, this isn't about proving yourself to me. This is about proving to yourself that your mother's concerns were wrong. What if they weren't wrong? What if I really am as irresponsible and selfish as those recordings make me sound? Then you have the opportunity to become someone better. Growth and change are always possible if someone genuinely wants to change. I think I do want to change. I just don't know how. The next few weeks brought changes I hadn't expected. Beverly started calling regularly, not with demands or complaints, but with questions. How had Dorothy managed to accumulate so much wealth while living modestly? What investment strategies had she used? How did the rental properties generate such consistent income? At first, I was suspicious. Was this genuine interest in financial responsibility, or was Beverly gathering information to build a case for challenging the will? But as our conversations continued, I began to hear something different in her voice: humility. She asked about Dorothy's investment philosophy like a student seeking to understand rather than a lawyer looking for weaknesses. Mom always seemed so practical about money, she said during one call. I thought that meant she was conservative. I never realized conservative could also mean strategic. Your mother researched every investment carefully. She preferred steady growth over dramatic returns. That's the opposite of my approach. I've been chasing high returns and ignoring risk. What made you realize that? I sat down with a financial advisor after our meeting. Showed him my debt-to-income ratios, my spending patterns, everything. He was blunt about my situation. What did he tell you? That if I were anyone else's client with my financial profile, he'd recommend bankruptcy. The only reason I'm still viable is my salary, and even that won't be enough if I keep spending the way I have been. Beverly paused. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Go ahead. Do you think Mom was right about me? Am I really as irresponsible as those recordings make me sound? It was a fair question, and she deserved an honest answer. I think you developed some poor habits that your mother was worried would get worse with access to significant money. But do you think I can change? I think anyone can change if they're genuinely motivated to do so. What would convince you that my motivation is genuine? I thought about Dorothy's letter and her hope that Beverly might prove herself worthy of sharing the larger inheritance. Actions, not words. Sustained changes in behavior over time. How much time? I don't know. Your mother spent 2 years documenting concerning behavior. I suppose it would take at least that long to document improved behavior. 2 years, Beverly repeated. That's a long time to prove yourself. It's a short time compared to the rest of your life. The following month, Beverly did something that surprised me. She sold her BMW and bought a used Honda Civic. When I asked her about it, she said, "The lease payment was killing me. This car will get me to work just fine, and the savings will help me pay down credit card debt." Small change, but significant for someone whose identity had been tied to maintaining an expensive image. She also started visiting more often. But not to discuss the inheritance. She came to learn about the cars, to understand why Dorothy had chosen those particular vehicles, to hear stories about our marriage that she'd apparently never paid attention to before. "I never knew you two went to car shows together," she said one afternoon as we looked at the Mustang. "We started going after I retired. Your mother said she wanted to understand why I found classic cars so fascinating. And did she understand? She came to appreciate the craftsmanship, the engineering solutions. She said these cars represented an era when things were built to last rather than built to replace." Beverly ran her hand along the Mustang's fender. "I always thought your car interest was just an old man hobby. Did you ever ask me about it?" "No. I assumed it wasn't important. A lot of assumptions have gotten us into trouble, haven't they? More than I want to admit." During another visit, Beverly brought financial documents, her budget spreadsheet, debt consolidation plan, and revised spending guidelines. She'd cut her monthly expenses by almost 40% and was aggressively paying down her highest interest debt. "I want you to see that I'm serious about changing," she said. I reviewed her numbers carefully. The changes were substantial and would require significant lifestyle adjustments. "This is impressive work, Beverly. How are you managing the social pressure at your firm? I imagine your colleagues notice changes like selling your car." "Some do. I told them I'm working toward long-term financial goals, and that meant making short-term sacrifices." "How did they react?" "Mixed responses. A few respect it. Others think I'm being foolish. One partner told me that image is everything in corporate law, and I might be damaging my advancement prospects. What do you think? I think Mom was right when she said that real wealth isn't about impressing other people. That statement stayed with me for days. Beverly was starting to internalize lessons that Dorothy had tried to teach through example rather than lecture, but I remained cautious. People could change their behavior for tactical reasons without changing their underlying character. The real test would be whether Beverly maintained these changes when the pressure was off, when no inheritance was at stake. 6 months after our confrontation in the garage, Beverly made another significant decision. She took a position with a smaller law firm that specialized in family law and estate planning. The salary was 30% less than her corporate job, but the work was more personally meaningful. I want to help families navigate these kinds of situations. She told me, help them avoid the mistakes our family made. What mistakes are those? Poor communication, assumptions instead of honest conversations, parents and children who don't really know each other as adults. It was a mature insight, and it gave me hope that her changes were genuine rather than calculated. But it also raised a question. Even if Beverly proved herself capable of personal growth and better financial judgment, what kind of relationship did I want with her going forward? The damage from those first hours after Dorothy's funeral wasn't easily forgotten. The recording of her planning to put me in a nursing home still played in my mind sometimes. The casual cruelty of calling me a useless old man who couldn't be trusted with money. Could genuine change overcome that kind of betrayal? Could a father forgive a daughter who had shown so clearly that she viewed him as a burden rather than a person deserving respect? I was still working through those questions when Beverly called with news that would test both of our commitments to change. Dad, I need to tell you something and I'm not sure how you're going to react. Beverly's voice on the phone carried a tension I hadn't heard since our garage confrontation 8 months earlier. What's wrong? I made a mistake. A big one, at work. My first instinct was defensive. Was this about money? Had she reverted to old patterns under pressure? But something in her tone suggested this was different. Tell me what happened. I've been working on estate planning cases at the new firm. Well, last month I took on a case that seemed straightforward. Elderly man, 2 adult children fighting over his will, okay? The man had dementia, and one daughter was trying to get power of attorney to control his finances. The other daughter suspected financial abuse and wanted to block the petition. I waited for her to continue. I represented the daughter trying to get power of attorney. Did all the normal due diligence, filed the appropriate paperwork. The court granted the petition. That sounds routine. It was routine. Until I discovered that my client had already been stealing money from her father's accounts before getting legal authority to manage them. My stomach tightened. How much money? Over $200,000. She'd been forging his signature on checks, using his credit cards, even took out a home equity loan against his property. And you didn't know. I should have known. There were red flags I missed because I was focused on the legal technicalities instead of really investigating my client's motivations. Beverly's voice cracked slightly. Dad, I helped an elder abuser get legal control over her victim's finances. I sat down heavily in my apartment chair. This was serious, both legally and ethically. What happened when you found out? I confronted my client immediately. She claimed it was all justified because her father wasn't competent to manage his money anyway. Said, I should mind my own business since the court had already ruled. What did you do? I withdrew from representation and reported her to the district attorney's office. But Dad, the damage was already done. That man lost his life savings because I wasn't careful enough. I could hear Beverly crying now, something I hadn't witnessed since she was a child. Have there been consequences for you professionally? The state bar opened an investigation. My firm put me on administrative leave pending the outcome. I could lose my license. Beverly, I'm sorry. That's a terrible situation. The worst part is that I kept thinking about Mom's recordings, about how I plan to control your finances for your own good. I was so focused on the legal mechanics that I didn't really look at the family dynamics. She paused to compose herself. I realized I could have been that daughter if circumstances had been different, if you had actually been vulnerable instead of secretly wealthy. This was the conversation I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Beverly was finally confronting the full implications of her attitudes toward elderly family members. What are you going to do? I don't know. My attorney says the bar investigation could go either way. I followed proper procedures, but I should have investigated more thoroughly before taking the case. And financially, I'll be fine for a few months. I've been living within my means, paying down debt. But if I lose my license, I'll have to start over in a different career. How do you feel about that possibility? Terrified. But also, maybe it would be appropriate. Maybe I need to learn humility the hard way. That evening, I called Roy Martinez to get his perspective on Beverly's situation. Elder abuse cases are tricky, he said. Attorneys can get caught in the middle when family members have hidden agendas, but she should have investigated more thoroughly, probably. But it sounds like she did the right thing when she discovered the problem. Withdrawing from representation and reporting the crime takes ethical courage. What do you think will happen with the Barr investigation? Hard to say. If she can demonstrate that her procedures were reasonable and that she acted appropriately once she learned about the fraud, she might receive a reprimand rather than license suspension. And what do you think about her motivations? Is this genuine remorse, or is she trying to manipulate me into helping with her legal problems? Roy was quiet for a moment. Based on what you've told me about her behavior over the past 8 months, this sounds genuine. People don't usually change careers and take pay cuts as part of a manipulation strategy. 2 weeks later, Beverly called with an update. The Barr investigation concluded. I received a formal reprimand and have to complete additional ethics training, but I keep my license. That's good news. Yes and no. My firm decided not to bring me back. They said the negative publicity around the case makes me a liability for their reputation. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not sure I'm working there. Never felt right after I started understanding what Mom was trying to teach about values versus appearances. What will you do now? I've been offered a position with legal aid, helping low-income families with estate planning and elder law issues. The salary is about half what I was making at the corporate firm, but it's work that matters. It's work that might help me understand how to be useful instead of just successful. The distinction she made, useful versus successful, reminded me of something Dorothy used to say. Success is what you accomplish for yourself. Usefulness is what you accomplish for others. Beverly, I want to ask you something, okay? If you hadn't inherited anything from your mother, if there were no assets in play, would you still be making these changes in your life? She was quiet for a long time. A year ago, I would have said no. I would have seen setbacks as reasons to fight harder for money and status, and now I think Mom was trying to save me from becoming someone I wouldn't respect. The question is whether I can become someone I do respect, regardless of what I inherit. That's a good question, Dad. I need to tell you something else. Whether or not you ever decide to share Mom's assets with me, I'm grateful for what you've shown me. About her planning, about consequences, about the difference between being entitled to something and being worthy of it. For the first time since Dorothy's funeral, Beverly sounded like the daughter I remembered raising. Not the entitled attorney who had dismissed me as incompetent, but the thoughtful young woman who had once cared about justice and family. A year and a half after Dorothy's funeral, I found myself sitting in the garage apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, reviewing the journal I'd been keeping about Beverly's progress. The entries told a story of genuine transformation that I was still trying to fully accept. Month 1, Beverly sold BMW, bought used Honda, significant lifestyle change. Month 3, changed law firms, took 30% pay cut for meaningful work. Month 6, completed debt consolidation plan, living within means. Month 8, professional crisis, elder abuse case, handled with integrity despite personal cost. Month 12, working at legal aid, helping families avoid financial manipulation. Month 15, volunteering at senior center, teaching basic legal rights to elderly residents. The pattern was clear. Beverly had sustained major changes in behavior, values, and priorities for over a year. These weren't temporary adjustments to impress me. They represented fundamental shifts in how she approached life, but I was still struggling with forgiveness. The recordings of her planning to control my finances, the casual dismissal of my competence, the immediate eviction from what I'd believed was my home, those memories remained sharp despite her subsequent growth. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Howard Barnes calling with his weekly check-in about the cars. Albert, I wanted to discuss something with you. I've had inquiries from collectors about the Cobra. There's strong interest in the car show circuit. What kind of inquiries? A collector in Texas wants to know if you'd consider selling. He's offering $700,000. I'd been driving the Cobra regularly, as Dorothy had suggested in her final letter. The experience never got old, the raw power, the precise engineering, the connection to automotive history. I'm not interested in selling right now. I figured as much. But there's another option. Several high-end car shows have invited you to display the collection. Monterey Car Week, Pebble Beach, the Barrett-Jackson auction preview. No sales pressure, just appreciation for the vehicle's history and condition. That sounds interesting. Your wife would have loved seeing these cars displayed properly. She mentioned several times that she hoped you'd share them with other enthusiasts who could appreciate the craftsmanship. After hanging up with Howard, I realized that Dorothy had anticipated this moment too. She'd left me assets not just for financial security, but for the joy of ownership and sharing. The cars weren't meant to sit hidden in a garage forever. That afternoon, Beverly called with her usual weekend check-in. Our conversations had evolved from stilted attempts at reconciliation to genuinely comfortable exchanges about work, family memories, and her ongoing efforts to build a more meaningful life. "How was your week at legal aid?" I asked. "Busy? We're handling 3 elder abuse cases right now. It's heartbreaking how often family members try to manipulate elderly relatives for financial gain. Does that work trigger difficult emotions for you every day? I see myself in some of these cases. The entitled children who think they know what's best for their parents' money." Beverly paused. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Mom hadn't prepared so carefully? If I had gained control over your finances the way I planned?" I try not to dwell on hypothetical scenarios. I think about it constantly. I would have destroyed your independence and probably lost your life savings through poor decisions. You'd be dependent on my charity now, living wherever I decided was appropriate. That's possible. It's not possible. It's certain. And the worst part is that I would have convinced myself I was helping you. This level of self-awareness was something I'd never expected from Beverly. She wasn't just acknowledging poor decisions, she was confronting the mindset that had led to those decisions. What changed your perspective? The elder abuse cases opened my eyes. I see family members every day who genuinely believe they're protecting elderly relatives while actually exploiting them. The justifications are always the same. Dad doesn't understand modern finances, or Mom can't handle these decisions anymore, and you recognize those justifications. I used every single one of them when I was planning to manage your inheritance, word for word. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Beverly and asked if she wanted to accompany me to the Monterey Car Week show that Howard had mentioned. "You want me to come with you to a car show? The cars will be displayed publicly for the first time. I thought you might like to see how other people react to your mother's collection choices." "I'd love that." "But Dad, are you sure? Won't people ask questions about ownership and inheritance?" "Let them ask. I'm proud of what your mother accomplished, and I'm not ashamed of how she chose to distribute her assets. Even the part where she left almost everything to you instead of splitting it equally, especially that part. She knew us both better than we knew ourselves." The car show was revelatory. Watching Beverly interact with other enthusiasts, seeing her genuine interest in the technical aspects of the vehicles, observing her respectful questions about automotive history, it reminded me of the curious, thoughtful young woman she'd been before ambition and financial pressure had hardened her perspective. But the most significant moment came when a collector asked about the car's provenance. Beverly could have remained silent, letting me handle the explanation. Instead, she spoke honestly about her mother's estate planning and the wisdom behind leaving valuable assets to someone who would appreciate and protect them. "My mother understood that inheritance should match responsibility," she told the collector. "She left these cars to my father because she knew he'd value them properly." No resentment, no hint that she felt cheated or unfairly treated, just acceptance that Dorothy had made thoughtful decisions based on careful observation of character. That night, driving home in the Cobra with Beverly following in her Honda, I finally allowed myself to consider the possibility that Dorothy's test had worked, not just as a protective mechanism for the assets, but as a catalyst for genuine growth in our daughter. The question remaining was whether I was ready to trust that growth with a larger share of Dorothy's legacy, and whether Beverly had truly changed or simply learned to present a more appealing version of herself while waiting for me to lower my guard. The answer would require one more test, one that would reveal whether her transformation was genuine or calculated. 2 years after Dorothy's funeral, I designed what I hoped would be the final test of Beverly's character. It came about naturally when she called with news about her work at legal aid. "Dad, we're handling a case that reminds me so much of our family situation. Elderly widower, adult daughter trying to get conservatorship to control his finances. Is it legitimate? That's what we're trying to determine. The man has early-stage dementia, but he's still capable of making basic decisions. His daughter claims he's being financially irresponsible. What does the evidence show? That's the complicated part. He has been making some questionable purchases, expensive collectibles, donations to charities that might not be legitimate, but nothing that suggests he's completely incompetent." Beverly paused. The daughter keeps saying she's trying to protect him from himself. She's hired attorneys, investigators, even a geriatric psychiatrist to evaluate his competency. What's your role in the case? I'm representing the man. He asked legal aid for help because he doesn't want his daughter controlling his finances. And what do you think is really happening? I think the daughter sees an inheritance slipping away and is using legitimate concerns about his judgment to justify taking control. The same thing I would have done to you if Mom hadn't prepared so carefully. That conversation gave me an idea. The next day, I called Beverly with an unusual request. I've been thinking about estate planning updates. I told her, would you be willing to meet with me and Carol Jenkins to discuss some changes I'm considering? Of course. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I just want to review some options while I'm healthy and thinking clearly. We scheduled the meeting for the following week. What Beverly didn't know was that I'd already discussed my real plan with Carol. You want to test her reaction to the possibility of losing everything. Carol had asked. I want to see how she responds when she thinks her patient work over the past 2 years might not lead to any financial reward. That's risky. If she's genuinely changed, this could damage your relationship. And if she hasn't genuinely changed, it's better to know now than later. The meeting took place in Carol's conference room. Beverly arrived promptly, dressed professionally, but modestly, another sign of her changed priorities. She greeted Carol warmly and settled in to listen to whatever I wanted to discuss. Beverly, I began, I've been reviewing my estate planning, and I want to discuss some concerns I have about the future. What kind of concerns? Financial concerns. The rental properties have been performing well, but I'm worried about my ability to manage them as I get older. The car collection is appreciating, but it requires specialized knowledge to maintain properly. Beverly nodded thoughtfully. Those are legitimate concerns. Have you considered professional management services? I've considered several options, including the possibility of liquidating everything and placing the proceeds in a charitable trust. Beverly's expression didn't change. That's one approach. What charity were you thinking of? I watched her face carefully. No flash of anger or disappointment. No immediate attempt to talk me out of the idea. Just genuine interest in understanding my reasoning. I was thinking about funding a foundation that provides financial education and elder abuse prevention services. Something that would honor your mother's memory while addressing problems we've both seen in our work. That sounds like something Mom would have supported. Carol leaned forward. Albert, can you explain your concerns about keeping the assets in the family? I'm concerned that inheriting significant wealth might interfere with Beverly's personal growth. She's worked hard to develop better financial habits and find meaningful work. A large inheritance might undermine that progress. This was the crucial moment. How would Beverly react to the suggestion that her improved character might actually disqualify her from inheriting? Beverly was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Is this about testing me again? To see how I'll react to the possibility of not inheriting. I was surprised by her directness. What makes you ask that? Because it's exactly what I would do if I were in your position. I'd want to know whether my behavior over the past 2 years was genuine change or strategic manipulation. Beverly looked directly at me. The honest answer is that I'd be disappointed, not because I feel entitled to Mom's assets, but because it would mean I hadn't succeeded in rebuilding your trust. And financially, I'd be fine. I'm living within my means, my debt is manageable, and my work is fulfilling even at a lower salary. I don't need an inheritance to be happy, but you'd want one. I'd want the relationship with you that might come with it. The feeling that I'd proven myself worthy of your forgiveness and confidence. Carol intervened. Beverly, if your father did decide to leave everything to charity, how would that affect your feelings about the changes you've made in your life? It wouldn't change them. The changes were necessary regardless of any inheritance. I needed to become someone I could respect whether or not anyone else ever did. She paused. But I'd hope that Dad would at least acknowledge that I tried to learn from Mom's lessons about character and responsibility. I found myself moved by her response. This wasn't the calculating attorney who had thrown me out of my home 2 years earlier. This was someone who had genuinely grappled with her own shortcomings and worked to address them. Beverly, what if I told you that this whole conversation was a test? I'd say that I understand why you felt you needed one more test, and I'd hope that my response helped you reach a conclusion you're comfortable with. And what conclusion do you think that would be? That's not for me to decide, but I hope you'd conclude that I'm not the same person who called you a useless old man. That I've learned to value family relationships over financial gain. Carol looked between Beverly and me. Albert, do you want to explain what you're really considering? I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. Beverly, I'm not actually planning to leave everything to charity, but I needed to know how you'd react if I did. And how did I do better than I expected? Better than I hoped. For the first time in our meeting, Beverly smiled. Does that mean I passed your final test? It means you've proven that your mother's concerns were addressable through time and experience, and that her faith in your potential for growth was justified. That afternoon, Carol prepared the legal documents while Beverly and I talked in her office waiting area. For the first time in years, our conversation felt natural and unforced. How long were you planning that test? Beverly asked. About a month. I needed to see how you'd react to losing everything after working so hard to prove yourself, and if I had failed. If I'd gotten angry or tried to talk you out of donating to charity, then I would have known that your changes were strategic rather than genuine. Beverly nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. I put you through 2 years of uncertainty about my character. You had every right to test my motivations one more time. The question now is what happens next? What do you mean? I handed her the folder Carol had prepared. Your mother's letter suggested that if you proved yourself worthy, I might choose to share the inheritance. I think you've done that. Beverly opened the folder and began reading. Her eyes widened as she processed the legal language. You're creating a trust that gives me access to half the rental properties and one of the cars, the Charger. Howard thinks you'd appreciate the engineering, and it's the most practical of the three for regular driving. Dad, this is... She stopped reading and looked at me directly. Are you sure? This is worth millions of dollars, I'm sure, but there are conditions. What conditions? The trust doesn't vest fully until you've maintained your current lifestyle and financial responsibility for another 2 years. If you revert to overspending or poor financial judgment, the assets return to my estate. That's reasonable. Also, you'll work with the financial advisors your mother chose. No dramatic investment changes without their approval. I understand. And Beverly, this isn't just about money. This is about honoring your mother's memory by proving that her faith in your ability to grow was justified. Beverly set down the documents and was quiet for several minutes. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know what to say. Say that you'll continue being the woman you've become over the past 2 years. I will. I promise. Then we have a deal. Carol returned with the completed paperwork. As we signed the various documents, she explained the trust structure and Beverly's responsibilities as a beneficiary. This is quite generous, Carol told Beverly, but also quite protective. Your father is ensuring that these assets will benefit you only if you continue demonstrating the judgment that earned them. I think Mom would approve of the structure, Beverly replied. I think she'd be proud of both of you, Carol said. That evening, we drove to the garage so Beverly could see the Charger that would soon be hers. She'd visited many times over the past 2 years, but this time felt different. She was no longer an outsider looking at assets she'd been denied. She was a family member being welcomed into shared ownership of her mother's legacy. I want to understand something, Beverly said as we looked at the orange muscle car. You could have given me access to these assets at any time over the past 2 years. Why wait until now? Because giving them to you earlier would have been charity. Giving them to you now is recognition of character development. What's the difference? Charity creates dependency. Recognition creates responsibility. Beverly ran her hand along the Charger's hood. Mom really understood psychology, didn't she? Better than either of us gave her credit for. I miss her, so do I. But I think she'd be proud of how this turned out. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Dad, can I ask you about forgiveness? What about it? Do you forgive me for how I treated you after the funeral, for the things I said and planned to do? It was a question I'd been expecting, and one I'd thought about extensively over the past months. I forgive the person who made those choices, I said carefully. But I'm not the same person I was then, and neither are you. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about accepting that people can grow beyond their worst moments. I'll never forget calling you a useless old man. It's the thing I'm most ashamed of in my entire life. Good, that shame is part of what's motivated your growth. Will you ever trust me completely again? I trust the person you are now. Whether that trust extends to the person you'll be in 5 or 10 years depends on the choices you make going forward. Beverly nodded. That's fair. A few weeks later, Beverly took delivery of the Charger. Howard had taught her basic maintenance procedures and helped her understand the car's history and significance. Watching her drive it away from the garage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, pride in my daughter's character. But the real test wasn't the inheritance itself, it was how Beverly would handle newfound wealth while maintaining the values she'd developed during her period of financial constraint. The answer came gradually over the following months. Beverly continued working at Legal Aid despite no longer needing the income. She maintained her modest lifestyle using the rental income to fund retirement savings and charitable giving rather than luxury purchases. She even started teaching financial literacy classes at the senior center where she volunteered. Most importantly, she began calling regularly, not because she wanted something, but because she wanted to maintain our relationship. The conversations were easy, natural, filled with mutual respect that had been missing for years. 6 months after the trust was established, Beverly called with news that surprised me. Dad, I want to run something by you. I've been offered a partnership position at a prestigious firm downtown. Significant salary increase, corner office, all the status symbols I used to think were important. Are you interested? That's what I want to discuss. The work would be corporate law again, helping wealthy families structure their finances for tax advantages, legal but not particularly meaningful. And you're torn. I'm not torn at all. I turned it down. I wanted you to know because a year ago, I would have jumped at the opportunity without considering anything except the money and prestige. What's different now? I've learned the difference between being successful and being useful, and I'd rather be useful. 3 years after Dorothy's funeral, I stood in the garage looking at a letter that had arrived that morning. The envelope was addressed to both Beverly and me, with a return address I didn't recognize. Beverly arrived within an hour of my call, still driving the Charger but treating it with the care and respect Howard had taught her. She'd become quite knowledgeable about classic car maintenance, often calling with questions about proper storage procedures or asking Howard's advice about preserving the vehicle's authenticity. "What's the mysterious letter about?" she asked, as we settled in the apartment. "I'm not sure. It's from a law firm in Oregon. They say it concerns Dorothy's estate." We opened the envelope together. Inside was a formal legal document and a handwritten note from an attorney named Patricia Mills. "Mr. and Ms. Reynolds," the note read, "I'm writing to inform you about a bequest that your wife and mother made to our firm several years ago. She established a fund to provide legal services for elderly individuals facing family financial disputes. The fund has now grown large enough to begin operations, and Mrs. Reynolds specified that you should be notified when this milestone was reached." Beverly looked at me with amazement. Mom created another fund. How much money did she actually have? I read through the legal documents carefully. Dorothy had established the fund 7 years earlier with an initial deposit of $500,000. Through careful investment management, it had grown to over $800,000. She planned everything, I said quietly, even charitable giving that wouldn't activate until after we'd had time to process her other bequests. "Look at this," Beverly said, pointing to another paragraph. She specified that any family member who demonstrated responsible financial management and commitment to helping others could serve on the fund's advisory board. The invitation was clear. Dorothy had created one final opportunity for Beverly to prove herself worthy of greater responsibility. "Are you interested?" I asked. "Very much. But I want to understand the commitment involved before I say yes." We spent the next week researching the fund and speaking with Patricia Mills about the responsibilities of board service. The fund would provide free legal representation for elderly individuals facing financial abuse or exploitation by family members. Essentially, Patricia explained during our phone call, we'd be helping people in situations similar to what your family navigated, but where the elderly person doesn't have the protective resources your mother created. Beverly was quiet for a moment, so we'd be preventing other families from going through what we went through. "That's the goal. I want to do this," Beverly said firmly. "Not just as a board member, but as a volunteer attorney. I can provide direct legal services on evenings and weekends." This decision sealed my conviction that Beverly's transformation was genuine and permanent. She was volunteering additional time and expertise to help others, not seeking recognition or financial benefit. Over the following months, Beverly threw herself into the fund's work with the same intensity she'd once directed toward corporate advancement. She helped elderly clients protect their assets from manipulative family members, educated seniors about their legal rights, and even testified before the state legislature about needed reforms in guardianship law. But the most meaningful moment came 6 months later when Beverly called with news about a case she'd handled. "Dad, you remember that client I mentioned, the elderly man whose daughter was trying to gain financial control? The one who reminded you of our situation? Yes, we won. The court ruled that the daughter's concerns weren't sufficient to justify conservatorship, and the man retains control of his finances. That's wonderful news. But here's the thing that really got to me. After the hearing, the man thanked me for helping him stay independent. He said his greatest fear wasn't losing his money, it was losing his dignity and autonomy." Beverly's voice carried emotion as she continued. "I realized that's exactly what I was planning to take away from you. Not just your financial independence, but your dignity and autonomy as an adult. You've come a long way from that mindset because Mom gave me the chance to see the consequences of my attitudes, and because you were patient enough to let me prove I could change." That evening, I called Carol Jenkins to discuss updating my own estate planning documents. "I want to remove the conditions from Beverly's trust," I told her. "She's proven herself beyond any reasonable doubt. Are you sure? The 2-year monitoring period isn't complete yet, I'm sure. She's not just managing the assets responsibly. She's using her experience to help others avoid similar family conflicts. That would certainly honor your wife's intentions." A month later, Beverly and I met again in Carol's office to sign the updated documents. The trust restrictions were removed, giving Beverly full access to her inheritance without ongoing oversight. "How does it feel to have complete financial freedom?" I asked as we left the law office, terrifying, she admitted, but also liberating. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm not worried about money or status or what other people think about my choices." "What are you worried about?" "Living up to the responsibility Mom placed in me, making sure these assets continue serving purposes she would have approved of." We drove to the garage afterward where Beverly wanted to check on the Mustang and Cobra. She'd been helping Howard with maintenance on all 3 cars, learning skills she'd never been interested in before. "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I'm happier now than I was when I was making twice as much money and living in that expensive apartment. I actually look forward to Mondays because I enjoy my work. Your mother would be proud. I hope so. I think about her every day, wondering if I'm making choices she would respect. You are. As we stood looking at Dorothy's carefully chosen cars, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we'd completed. Dorothy had designed an inheritance plan that protected assets while transforming character. She'd given Beverly the opportunity to fail spectacularly, then work her way back to earning trust and respect. But perhaps most importantly, she'd given both of us the chance to discover who we really were when stripped of assumptions, entitlements, and familiar roles. The result was a relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation, and a daughter who had learned to value wisdom over wealth. 4 years after Dorothy's death, Beverly and I had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and meaningful. Our monthly dinners had become a tradition, sometimes at the garage apartment, sometimes at her modest but comfortable house in Pasadena that she'd bought with careful budgeting and a reasonable mortgage. Tonight we were at my place, and Beverly was cooking. She'd developed an interest in preparing simple, well-made meals, another departure from her previous lifestyle of expensive restaurant dining and takeout convenience. The Morrison case settled today, she said, stirring a pot of soup she'd been working on for the past hour. The one where the son was stealing from his father's retirement account. That's the one. The father gets his money back, plus damages. The son faces criminal charges. Beverly set down her spoon and leaned against the counter. You know what the hardest part of these cases is? What's that? Seeing myself in the people we're prosecuting. Understanding how easy it would have been for me to become them if Mom hadn't intervened. I'd noticed this pattern in Beverly's work. She brought unusual insight to elder abuse cases because she understood the mindset of financial manipulators from personal experience. Do you think that makes you a better advocate? I think it makes me a more honest one. I can't pretend that financial abuse only happens to obviously bad people. It happens when good people make terrible choices and then justify them. Over dinner, Beverly told me about her plans for expanding the legal aid program. She'd applied for grants to hire additional attorneys and had been invited to speak at conferences about elder abuse prevention. There's something else, she said as we finished eating. I've been offered a position as director of the Elder Law Project at the state level. It would mean coordinating services across multiple counties. That sounds like significant responsibility. It would require moving to Sacramento, working with legislators, managing a much larger budget. Are you interested? Beverly was quiet for a moment. I'm interested in the work. The impact we could have would be substantial, but I'm not sure I want to leave this area because of the garage, the cars, because of you, because of the relationship we've rebuilt. I don't want geography to interfere with what we've created. This concern touched me deeply. Beverly had learned to value family relationships over career advancement, a complete reversal of her previous priorities. You know, I'd support whatever decision you make, I told her. I know. But I also know that rebuilding trust takes time, and I don't want to jeopardize what we have for a job opportunity. Beverly, can I tell you something, of course? The trust between us isn't fragile anymore. You've proven yourself thoroughly. A job in Sacramento wouldn't change how I feel about the woman you've become. She smiled. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. Your mother wanted you to have the freedom to make choices based on your values rather than financial pressure. This seems like exactly that kind of choice. The next week, I had lunch with Howard Barnes to discuss routine maintenance on the cars. We'd become friends over the years, bonded by our shared appreciation for automotive craftsmanship and our mutual respect for Dorothy's wisdom. How's Beverly doing with the Charger? He asked. She treats it like the treasure it is, better than some collectors I know. Your wife would be pleased. She always said the cars should go to people who understood their significance. Howard, can I ask you something about Dorothy's planning? Sure. Did you know about the family dynamics when she was acquiring the cars, the problems she was documenting with Beverly? Howard nodded slowly. She shared some concerns. Not specifics, but enough for me to understand why the inheritance structure was so important to her. What did she tell you? That she was worried about her daughter's judgment with money and relationships, that she hoped time and experience might help Beverly develop better values. And what do you think now? I think the plan worked better than anyone could have expected. Beverly isn't just managing assets responsibly, she's become someone who uses them to help others. That afternoon, Beverly called with her decision about the Sacramento position. I'm going to take it, she said. But with conditions. I want to maintain the Pasadena house and come back every other weekend, and I want to keep my volunteer work with the local legal aid office. That sounds like a thoughtful approach. I realize that running away from opportunities because I'm afraid of making mistakes is just another form of poor judgment. Mom would want me to use my skills where they can do the most good. I agree. And Dad, there's something else. I want to establish a fund in Mom's name that provides college scholarships for students interested in elder law and financial protection services. That's a beautiful idea. I've been thinking about legacy, not just what we inherit, but what we pass forward. Mom gave us the chance to learn about responsibility and character. I want to give others the same opportunity. 6 months later, at the Scholarship Fund's inaugural dinner, Beverly introduced me to a room full of legal aid attorneys, social workers, and law students committed to protecting elderly citizens from financial abuse. My mother understood something that took me years to learn, Beverly said during her speech. That true wealth isn't about accumulating assets, it's about using resources wisely to benefit others. The students we're supporting tonight represent that philosophy in action. As I listened to my daughter speak with conviction and wisdom about values I thought she'd never understand, I felt Dorothy's presence in the room. Her plan had accomplished something more profound than protecting assets or teaching financial responsibility. She had transformed a broken family into a functional one, guided a lost daughter back to her better nature, and created a legacy that would benefit strangers for generations to come. The garage that had once seemed like such a cruel bequest had become the foundation for healing, growth, and service that continued expanding outward in ways Dorothy had probably never imagined, but would certainly have approved of. Sometimes the greatest inheritances are the ones that teach us who we're capable of becoming. 5 years after Dorothy's funeral, I found myself in a situation I never could have predicted. The garage apartment had become more than temporary shelter. It had become home in ways the Pasadena house never quite managed. The industrial setting suited my engineering background, and the proximity to the cars gave me daily reminders of Dorothy's love and foresight. But life had taken another unexpected turn. Tommy Rodriguez, the mechanic who owned the shop next door, had approached me with a proposition that was both practical and appealing. "Albert, I'm thinking about expanding," he'd said during one of our regular coffee conversations, adding a restoration service for classic cars. "Problem is, I know the mechanical side, but I don't understand the collector market or the authentication process. What are you thinking? Partnership. I provide the workspace and mechanical expertise. You provide the knowledge about values, authenticity, collector preferences." Howard Barnes could advise on the business side. I'd been considering the idea for weeks. At 63, I had the energy for a new project and the expertise Dorothy's collection had forced me to develop. More importantly, I discovered that I enjoyed working with cars almost as much as I enjoyed the engineering challenges they represented. What would Beverly think about this? Tommy had asked when I'd explained my interest. Let's find out. Beverly's reaction had surprised me. "Dad, that sounds perfect for you. You've always been happiest when you're solving problems and building things. You don't think it's impractical for someone my age to start a new business? I think it's exactly what Mom would have wanted, you using your skills for something you're passionate about." The restoration shop had opened 6 months later. Word spread quickly through the collector car community, particularly after we successfully restored a 1967 Mustang similar to my own. The combination of my authentication knowledge, Tommy's mechanical skills, and Howard's market connections created a service that was both high quality and reasonably priced. But the real satisfaction came from the educational aspect. We'd started offering workshops for car enthusiasts, teaching them to identify authentic classic cars and avoid costly mistakes when purchasing or restoring vehicles. "You're preventing people from being cheated," Beverly had observed during one of her weekend visits, just like the legal aid work prevents families from being manipulated. The parallel hadn't occurred to me before, but she was right. Both of our careers had evolved toward protecting people from exploitation, whether financial or automotive. One morning, while reviewing applications for Beverly's scholarship fund, I received a call that reminded me how interconnected our work had become. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Patricia Mills from the Elder Law Fund in Oregon. I have an unusual situation I'd like to discuss with you." "What kind of situation?" "We're representing an elderly man whose son has been selling his classic car collection without permission. The cars were supposedly worthless, but our client believes they were valuable. Would you be willing to provide expert consultation?" The case was heartbreakingly familiar. An 80-year-old widower with early-stage dementia owned a collection of 1960s muscle cars his deceased wife had helped him acquire over decades. His son had convinced him the cars were old junk taking up garage space and had sold them for scrap prices to dealers who recognized their true value. "The financial loss is over $300,000, Patricia explained during our phone conference, but the emotional loss is even greater. These cars represented 40 years of marriage and shared passion. How can I help? We need expert testimony about the car's actual value and documentation, that the son knew they were worth far more than he claimed." The case took 3 months to resolve, but the outcome was satisfying. The son was required to pay restitution based on the car's true market value, and several of the vehicles were recovered from dealers who had purchased them in good faith. "You probably saved this man from losing his life savings," Patricia told me after the settlement. "We all saved him." Legal advocacy, expert testimony, and family members willing to speak up for what's right. Speaking of family members, your daughter Beverly has been instrumental in developing our prosecution strategies for these kinds of cases. The conversation reminded me of how far Beverly and I had both come from the bitter confrontation in this same garage 5 years earlier. We'd each found ways to use our skills and resources for meaningful purposes that honored Dorothy's memory. That evening, Beverly called with news that brought everything full circle. "Dad, I've been asked to testify before Congress about elder abuse prevention. They want me to speak about the intersection of family dynamics and financial exploitation. That's quite an honor. It's also quite an opportunity. The legislation we're supporting could provide federal funding for programs like the ones we've been developing. Will you mention our family's experience? I'd like to, if you're comfortable with that. Not the details, but the general principle that families can overcome financial conflicts through proper planning and character development. I think your mother would want you to share whatever helps others avoid similar problems. There's one more thing. I want to invite you to come with me to Washington. As an expert witness on the practical aspects of protecting elderly people from automotive fraud. The invitation felt like validation of the path we'd both chosen. Dorothy's inheritance plan had not only protected our family assets, but had guided both Beverly and me toward careers that served others facing similar vulnerabilities. A month later, sitting in a congressional hearing room listening to my daughter speak eloquently about family financial dynamics, I thought about the journey that had brought us there. The garage that had once seemed like exile had become the foundation for purpose and service. Beverly's testimony was particularly powerful when she addressed the psychological factors that made elderly people vulnerable to family manipulation. Financial abuse often begins with dismissing the victim's competence, she told the committee. Family members convince themselves they're helping while actually serving their own interests. The antidote is respect for the elderly person's autonomy, judgment, and right to make their own decisions. When my turn came to testify, I focused on the specific tactics used to defraud elderly collectors, but I also spoke about the importance of family communication and honest evaluation of competence versus convenience. 2 years after our congressional testimony, the Elder Protection Act had become law, providing federal funding for the kinds of programs Beverly and I had been developing independently. The legislation created a national network of legal aid services, expert witness databases, and educational resources for families facing financial exploitation. Beverly had been appointed as the national coordinator for the program, a position that required her to travel extensively but allowed her to maintain her home base in California. The scholarship fund she'd established had grown to support over 50 students annually, creating a pipeline of attorneys dedicated to elder law protection. But the most meaningful development came on a quiet Tuesday morning when I received a call from someone I'd never expected to hear from again. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Richard Hayes. I was your daughter's attorney several years ago during the estate matter." I remembered him, the expensive suit, the obvious discomfort when he'd realized the strength of Dorothy's estate planning. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hayes?" "I'm calling because I have a client who's facing a situation very similar to what your family navigated. An elderly widower whose children are fighting over his assets while he's still alive and competent." "I see. The difference is that this man doesn't have the protective structures your wife created. He's vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation your daughter has become expert at preventing. And you'd like our help, I'd like to hire both of you. Your daughter for the legal strategy, you for consultation on asset protection and family dynamics. This case could set important precedents for how courts handle these disputes." The irony wasn't lost on me. The attorney who had once represented Beverly's challenge to Dorothy's will was now seeking our expertise to protect someone else's autonomy. Beverly was equally amazed when I called her with the news. "Richard Hayes, the man who told me I should challenge Mom's estate plan, the same one? Apparently he's learned something about family dynamics and asset protection over the past few years. What do you think we should do?" "I think we should help. This sounds like exactly the kind of case your mother would have wanted us to handle." The case was complex and emotionally challenging. The client, a 78-year-old retired professor named Dr. Eugene Parker, owned valuable real estate and investments worth about $8 million. His 2 children were pressuring him to simplify his finances by transferring assets to them for better management. But Dr. Parker was sharp, articulate, and clearly competent to make his own decisions. He'd contacted Richard Hayes because he suspected his children were more interested in securing their inheritance than protecting his welfare. "They keep telling me I'm too old to understand modern financial instruments," Dr. Parker told us during our first meeting. "They want me to sign over power of attorney so they can optimize my portfolio." Beverly and I exchanged glances. The language was identical to what she'd planned to use with me years earlier. "Dr. Parker, what do you want to achieve?" Beverly asked. I want to remain independent as long as I'm competent. I want my children to respect my judgment. And I want to make sure they inherit assets I've protected, not assets they've convinced me to let them manage. Over the next 6 months, we helped Dr. Parker create protective structures similar to what Dorothy had designed. Trust arrangements that preserved his independence while ensuring professional management if he ever became incompetent. Clear documentation of his current mental state and financial judgment. Legal mechanisms to prevent coercive transfers of assets. But we also did something Dorothy hadn't been able to do. We facilitated honest conversations between Dr. Parker and his children about expectations, inheritance, and respect. The breakthrough came during a family meeting Beverly moderated in the conference room of our legal aid office. Dr. Parker, Beverly said to his daughter, "You've expressed concerns about your father's ability to manage his finances. Can you give specific examples of poor decisions he's made?" The daughter, a successful real estate agent in her 40s, struggled to provide concrete evidence. "He's just old people his age don't understand how money works today. I managed a university endowment for 20 years, Dr. Parker replied quietly. "I think I understand financial principles reasonably well, but Dad, you're making emotional decisions. Keeping that big house when you could downsize and invest the difference? I'm keeping the house because I enjoy living there and I can afford to maintain it. That's not an emotional decision, it's a lifestyle choice." Beverly leaned forward. "What I'm hearing is that you disagree with your father's priorities, not his competence. Is that accurate?" The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. Dr. Parker's children gradually acknowledged that their concerns were more about inheritance timing than cognitive decline. They wanted certainty about their future financial security, but they were seeking it by diminishing their father's autonomy. "This is exactly how these situations develop," Beverly explained to me afterward. "Adult children start viewing their parents as obstacles to their own financial plans rather than people deserving respect and independence." The case resolved without litigation. Dr. Parker maintained control of his assets while establishing clear succession planning that satisfied his children's need for security without compromising his autonomy. But the real victory was personal. Dr. Parker's son called me 2 months after the settlement. "Mr. Reynolds, I wanted to thank you and your daughter for helping our family. I didn't realize how disrespectful we'd become toward Dad until someone pointed it out directly. These patterns develop gradually," I replied. "The important thing is recognizing them before permanent damage is done. We almost lost our relationship with Dad because we were so focused on protecting his money that we forgot to protect his dignity." That conversation stayed with me for days. It perfectly captured what Dorothy had understood and what Beverly had learned through painful experience, that financial security without respect is worthless, and that the greatest inheritance parents can give children is the wisdom to value relationships over assets. 6 years after Dorothy's death, Beverly and I had found our calling in protecting other families from the mistakes we'd almost made. The garage that had once represented abandonment had become the headquarters for work that honored Dorothy's memory while serving people who needed exactly the kind of protection she'd provided for us. Sometimes the most important lessons come disguised as losses, and the greatest gifts are the ones that teach us who we're capable of becoming when our assumptions are stripped away and we're forced to rebuild from scratch. 7 years after Dorothy's funeral, I stood in the garage on a crisp October morning, preparing for what would be both an ending and a beginning. Beverly was arriving soon with a film crew from a documentary production company that was creating a program about innovative approaches to family estate planning. The garage looked different now. Still home to the 3 classic cars, but also serving as the office for Reynolds and Rodriguez classic restorations and the meeting space for the Elder Protection Alliance. The industrial building that Dorothy had chosen for its camouflage had become a hub of meaningful activity. Howard Barnes was there early, as always, making final adjustments to the car's positioning for the cameras. At 68, he moved with the same careful precision that had made him Dorothy's trusted advisor. But he'd become something more important to me, a friend who'd witnessed our family's entire transformation. "Your wife would be amazed," he said as we waited for Beverly's arrival. "The garage she bought to protect you has become the center of a national movement." "I don't think she'd be amazed," I replied. "I think she planned for exactly this kind of outcome." "You really believe she anticipated all of this?" "I believe she understood that people who learn from painful experiences often become the best teachers for others facing similar challenges." Beverly arrived with her usual punctuality, followed by the documentary crew. At 37, she carried herself with confidence tempered by humility, a combination that made her extraordinarily effective in her work. She'd never remarried after her divorce years earlier, finding fulfillment in her career and in the family relationships she'd learned to value properly. "Are you ready for this?" she asked as the crew set up their equipment. as ready as anyone can be for having their life story broadcast on TV. It's not just our story anymore. It's about the hundreds of families who've been helped by the program's Mom's Planning inspired. The filming took most of the day. We walked through the garage, explaining how each car represented Dorothy's understanding of value, craftsmanship, and long-term thinking. We sat in the apartment, describing the emotional journey from conflict to reconciliation that had played out in these rooms. But the most powerful moment came when Beverly stood beside the charger that had become hers, explaining what she'd learned about inheritance and character. My mother didn't leave me a smaller inheritance because she loved me less, she told the camera. She left me exactly what she knew I could handle responsibly at the time. And she created a path for me to earn access to more if I proved I could grow beyond my initial limitations. The interviewer asked about the lessons other families might take from our experience. The first lesson is that inheritance isn't about fairness in the moment, it's about wisdom over time, Beverly replied. The second lesson is that money reveals character, but it doesn't have to define it permanently. People can change if they're genuinely motivated to change. And the third lesson the interviewer prompted, that the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's the opportunity to become someone you can respect. After the crew left, Beverly and I sat in the garage apartment sharing dinner and reflecting on the day's conversations. Do you ever regret how things happened? She asked. The pain and conflict that led to where we are now. I regret the pain, I said carefully, but I don't regret the outcome. We have a relationship now that's based on mutual respect rather than obligation. That's worth the difficult journey it took to get here. I think about alternate history sometimes. What if Mom had just split everything equally from the beginning? What if she'd never documented my behavior or created the test scenarios? What do you think would have happened? I think I would have continued making poor decisions with larger amounts of money. I think our relationship would have become increasingly strained as you watched me waste the assets you and Mom had worked so hard to build. And now I understand that wealth is a responsibility, not just an opportunity. And I understand that family relationships require ongoing effort, not just shared DNA. We were interrupted by a knock at the garage door. Tommy Rodriguez stood outside with his teenage grandson, who was interested in learning automotive restoration skills. Albert, do you have a few minutes to show Miguel the engine compartment on the Mustang? He's considering a career in classic car restoration. As I explained the intricacies of the GT390 engine to a young man who listened with the same fascination I'd felt at his age, I realized this was how Dorothy's legacy would continue. Not just through the legal programs and protective legislation Beverly had helped create, but through the sharing of knowledge, skills, and values with the next generation. Later that evening, after Tommy and Miguel had left, Beverly and I walked through the garage one final time. I have something to tell you, she said. I've been offered a position as Secretary of the California Department of Elder Affairs. It would mean giving up the national coordination role, but having more direct impact on policy implementation. Are you interested? Very much. But I wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable with me taking on such a visible public role. Our story will become more public if I accept. Your mother would want you to use your platform to help as many people as possible, even if it means our family business becomes a matter of public record, especially then. If our experience can help other families avoid similar conflicts, then sharing it serves Dorothy's ultimate purpose. Beverly smiled and hugged me, something that had become natural again after years of rebuilding trust. Thank you for being patient with me while I learned to become someone worth trusting. Thank you for doing the work to become that person. As I locked up the garage that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. Dorothy's unconventional inheritance plan had protected our family assets, but more importantly, it had protected our family's capacity for love, growth, and service to others. The garage would always be special to me, not because of the valuable cars it contained, but because it was where I'd learned that the greatest inheritances are the ones that teach us who we're capable of becoming when we're willing to do the hard work of change. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come disguised as challenges, and the greatest love is expressed through wisdom rather than indulgence. True wisdom and inheritance lies not in equal distribution, but in matching assets to character, giving each person exactly what they can handle responsibly while creating pathways for growth and redemption. The most powerful legacy isn't what you leave behind in your will, but what you teach your family about earning respect, building character, and using resources to serve others rather than just themselves.